From Washington, the McLaughlin Group, the American original. For over 3 decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk.
Issue 1, Iraq in crisis.
To stop the advance on Erbil, I've directed our military to take targeted strikes against ISIL terrorist convoys should they move toward the city. We intend to stay vigilant and take action if these terrorist forces threaten our personnel or facilities anywhere in Iraq, including our consulate in Erbil and our embassy in Baghdad.
Late on Thursday, President Obama directed the U.S. military to launch airstrikes against the Islamic State. That's the radical Muslim movement that has already seized large segments of Iraq and Syria and declared itself an Islamic caliphate. Question: is President Obama a day late and a dollar short intervening against the Islamic State? Pat Buchanan.
No, he's not. This is not our war, John. I think he's done the right thing in using air power to stop a successful attack on Kurdistan and keep the enemy away from it, but American air power can only do so many things. It can keep these characters out of Baghdad, it can keep them out of Erbil and out of Kurdistan, but in the long run, the Iraqis and the Turks and the folks in that region, the Kurds, they're going to have to fight this war themselves. And I will just one point, John, is who's been fighting them? Assad's been fighting them, the Iranians are against them, and Hezbollah's been fighting them. I think the United States could, with diplomacy, put together a coalition with a specific objective of going after the Islamic State, because that is our principal enemy, I think, in the region.
The Islamic State has seized $425 million in a bank takeover. They have American Humvees, some 50 American 155mm towed howitzers, small arms, and millions of rounds of ammunition, all seized when they overran Iraq bases and outposts. So what do you think in the light of that?
Well, they're well-funded and they're brutal. If you don't convert to their brand of Islam, they behead you, and they've been putting heads up on spikes in the villages that they've overrun. And I think the humanitarian intervention that the president has begun is totally just and appropriate, because it is a genocide. It's the extinction basically of a religious group that's up on these mountains. So the U.S. Military action has to do with helping the Peshmerga, who are a very well-trained and effective fighting force in Iraq. It is their fight. It is Iraq's fight. I agree with Pat that this is not a war between the U.S. and ISIL or ISIS, whatever you want to call them. I think the U.S. is in a position to certainly greatly assist the Iraqis, who now seem to be in a position where they're about to create a new government. It looks like Maliki might be out, and I think there is an alliance between the U.S. and whatever this new government that emerges. But this is Iraq's fight, and the president is pretty strong about not sending American troops back into Iraq.
The only way to stop ISIS is heavy U.S. air power combined with an Iraqi ground offensive, some believe. Do you believe that?
I think it is true that the US is going to have to take tougher steps. Now that we're committed, the reality on the ground is going to shape how we deploy force going forwards, because ISIL are not going to give up faced with even limited air power. They're going to continue to attack different targets they can, because it's a mission of ordained purity as they see it. And I think the great tragedy here is that the withdrawal in late 2011 has to some degree enabled that. But what we have to face up to is the fact that ISIL aren't solely concerned with Iraq. They're concerned with a regional project that involves Syria, Lebanon, and that unless the United States can provide both our military influence but our interlocutor political influence in bringing parties to the table, which we did very effectively with people like Ryan Crocker and General Petraeus, we have to have influence on the ground. That doesn't mean a reinvasion, but it does mean that we have to be there for the longer term.
Do you think events are propelling Obama?
Well, if they aren't propelling him, I don't know what he's doing in his job. I mean, this is a very, very important issue for the United States, because it's not only that whole region. It frankly is going to, at some point, have an enormous effect on the entire oil-producing countries. And we are going to be hostage to all of that. We cannot allow that to happen. It's bad enough that we have, for example, walked away from our commitment on Syria, which the president did. There is no real confidence at this stage of the game in the United States as the backup to a lot of the forces on our side who are literally, on some levels, outgunned and outmaneuvered. We cannot allow this to continue. It's directly in our national interest to find some way to stop these people from really expanding their influence.
Air power can't win this war, though, John.
I'm not saying air power is the only thing we can do.
No, but what I'm saying is we're going to be drawn in by using this air power, which can successfully hold them back from Erbil or hold them back from Baghdad, cannot win the war, and there's a real possibility we could be drawn in and people try to push us into the war, but it is not our war to fight and win.
Well, it's always the problem.
We have interests. We have interests. It may not be our war, but we have national interests that are involved, and we have to find some way to hold back these people, because otherwise we will suffer greatly as a country.
Tom?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Absolutely. No, I think we very much have to be involved, because whether it's the interlocutor relationships or putting military pressure on them, they will keep expanding. And
Obama, Eleanor,
about
Obama is
ground
approaching this through a political lens, not a national security lens. And he knows the promise he made, quasi-promise to the American people, that he would not get into this kind of activity.
Morally and politically, it would have been impossible for him not to respond to the humanitarian situation.
Correct.
But he is responding on a national security basis, because the grounds for the airstrikes are that he's protecting U.S. personnel there. But it's not a direct war against ISIL, and the Peshmerga are a good fighting force with help. Maybe they can defeat. And I agree that ISIL does have this moral, religious fervor, but now the Iraqis, it's an existential issue for them now. So maybe they're going to get some of this moral fervor too.
It should be pointed out that this isn't a question of relieving the starvation of some people. It's also a question of protecting our embassies and our consulates and our personnel. Right. And if that angle is played up to the American people, they're going to accept it.
Well, they will do that, but how does air power, John, save those 40,000 or 20,000 people up on that mountain? I don't know.
It stops mobility.
Exit question. Is this a tipping point for Iraq? And how Commander-in-Chief Obama handles this crisis will determine whether or not Iraq survives as a nation. Yes or no? Pat,
I think Iraq is eventually going to split apart.
It's how the Iraqis handle this. This is not all on President Obama.
I think the U.S. can play a very constructive role by bringing the various parties together and cooling sectarian tensions. We did it before with Ryan Crocker. We can do it again if we're showing commitment over the longer term.
Dream on.
No, it's not a dream. It's not a dream.
Go ahead.
Yeah, look, I've shared that view. I do think that we can do a lot more than what we might seem to be doing now. I'm not disagreeing that with what Pat says. We're going to have to be more involved, it seems to me, than we are right now, because we have major national interests involved, not only in this immediate war, but in terms of what it means for that whole region, and that whole region has a huge effect on our national interests.
Well stated, Mort. I can't improve on that. Don't forget the McLaughlin Group has its own website, and you can watch this program or earlier programs on the web at any time from anywhere in the world at McLaughlin.com. Could anything be simpler or more enticing? The McLaughlinGroup.com. Issue 2, Israel and Gaza, their future. This issue addresses the legal, political, and moral dimensions of Israel's recent bombing and land invasion of the Palestinian territory of Gaza, a conflict in which 1,886 Palestinians and 67 Israelis were killed, an area slightly more than twice the size of Washington, D.C. The heavy lifting in this piece will be done by Rabbi Henry Siegman, whose bio is provided for us by Nermeen Sheikh of the TV program Democracy Now!
Henry Siegman, the former executive director of the American Jewish Congress, long described as one of the nation's big three Jewish organizations, along with the American Jewish Committee and the Anti-Defamation League. Henry Siegman was born in 1930 in Frankfurt, Germany. 3 years later, the Nazis came to power. After fleeing Nazi troops in Belgium, his family eventually moved to the United States. His father was a leader of the European Zionist movement, pushing for the creation of a Jewish state. In New York, Henry Siegman studied and was ordained as an Orthodox rabbi by Yeshiva Torah Vodas. He later became head of the Synagogue Council of America. After his time at the American Jewish Congress, Siegman became a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. He now serves as president of the U.S. Middle East Project.
Rabbi Siegman on Israel's military operations in Gaza. Unjustified, he says.
Couldn't Israel be doing something to in preventing the disaster that is playing out now in terms of the destruction of human lives, couldn't they have done something that didn't require that cost?
Rabbi Siegman continues asking pointedly why the U.S. government has not identified the ideology of Israel's political right wing as being actually the same as the ideology of the quote-unquote terrorist group Hamas.
Why hasn't our government or anyone said, like Hamas, if you have parties like that in your government, you are not a peace partner and you are a terrorist group? If, in fact, you use violence to implement your policy, as Hamas does. So the hypocrisy in the discussion that is taking place publicly is just mind-boggling.
Is the U.S. government hypocritical for not negotiating with Hamas, Rabbi Siegman?
We're very happy to meet with the Taliban and to negotiate with them. And they cut off hands and heads of people, and they kill girls who go to school. And that didn't prevent the United States from having negotiations with the Taliban. So that's nonsense, that we don't talk to terrorist organizations.
How is the Israeli-Palestinian crisis solved? And what is the role of the United States?
The issue is America removing itself from being a collaborator in the policies. So if at some point the United States were to say, this is not what we can do. You want to do it? You're on your own. That would change. That could still change the situation. Because the one thing Israelis do not want to do is have the country live in a world where America is not there to have their back.
Question, is Rabbi Siegman right? Is America wrong to support Israel as we do? If so, what should we be doing differently, as you understand the rabbi, Tom Rogan?
I think that the rabbi makes points on a number of issues that are generating a lot of concern across the world in terms of Israel's conduct in Gaza. But I would say, in contrast to what he's actually suggesting, the difficulty for Israel, and you see this at the moment with Hamas having broken yet another ceasefire, is that how does a democracy stand and allow itself to be continually attacked without responding? Gaza is a very dense populated area, so inevitably there are going to be high civilian casualties. Because the Israelis have been more targeted with some of their operations? Perhaps.